LUN masking, sometimes called LUN security, is the way we control which hosts access which LUNs on a system. Now let's walk through it on the slide. Straight in with a complete diagram this time. So let's take a second to explain it, as it's a little bit different to the diagram on the previous slide. First of all, this time we only show 2 ports in our storage array on the right, ports 1 and 4. And we're also showing 2 HBAs, or 2 HBA ports in each of our hosts. Host Y at the top has ports Y1 and Y2, and host Z at the bottom has ports Z1 and Z2. And as we can see, each host is connected to both array ports. And this last piece of information is really important. Both hosts are connected to both array ports. And all 3 volumes are mapped as LUNs to both array ports too. What this means is that both hosts can access all 3 LUNs. Now then, let's say we want to tie things down a little so that only host Y can access LUN B1, and in turn that only host Z can access the 2 green LUNs. How do we do this? What we do is we add an access control list, or an ACL, to each of the ports. As we can see on the diagram, the ACL on port 1 tells us that HBA port Y1 can access LUN blue 1, and that HBA port Z1 can access LUNs green 1 and green 2. And similarly, the ACL on port 4 on our array states that HBA port Y2 can access LUN blue 1, while HBA port Z2 can access LUNs green 1 and green 2. And by applying these ACLs to the front-end ports on the arrays, we're said to have masked the LUNs, or enabled LUN masking. For example, as far as host Y is concerned, both ports only provide access to a LUN called B1 or blue 1, and it's blissfully ignorant to the existence of LUNs green 1 and green 2. Let's take a look at how this works. Host Y is trying to access LUN blue 1 via HBA port Y1. As we can see on the slide, this access request is allowed by the ACL, or by the LUN masking rules. So host Y is able to read and write data from LUN blue 1. Now let's say that host Y again is now trying to access LUN green 1 via the same HBA port. And I know we just said earlier on that it wouldn't even be aware of its existence, but let's just imagine for the purposes of this example that it is aware of LUN green 1. Anyway, this access attempt is disallowed because the LUN masking table doesn't allow it. And that's how LUN masking works. Now let's quickly mention sharing access to a single LUN by multiple hosts. As the text on the slide warns, be really careful doing this, and I mean really careful. We're about to explain why. Let's start out with our example array and 2 hosts again. This time we've configured LUN masking to allow both hosts to access LUN blue 1. Now then, if our 2 hosts read and write to LUN blue 1 without telling each other, we'll end up trashing that LUN, or at least the data on it. And in case that isn't clear, we're talking about corrupting the data on that LUN, effectively losing data. And that's the worst thing that can happen in a storage administrator's life. The worst thing. Imagine it working like this. LUN blue 1 hosts a normal file system. At 1:05 in the afternoon, host Y writes an update to a file called accounts. But it stores the update in its local cache buffer and plans to sync the update to disk later. Then, at 1:06, host Z updates the same accounts file with some more recent data, and it holds it in its local cache buffer too, intending to sync to disk later. And this process of holding data in the local cache buffer and only actually writing it to disk at a later point in time is very common. Anyway, now let's imagine host Z is getting low on memory, so flushes the contents of its buffer cache to disk at 1:07. But then at 1:08, host Y, which has the older copy of the data, flushes its buffers to disk too. And by doing this, host Y overwrites the changes made by host Z. And if you were following that, you'll know what's happened there. We've just lost data, because the data that host Z wrote was the most recent data, and it's just been overwritten by an older copy of the data by host Y. And that's bad, really bad. So the moral of the story? Don't let more than one system have read-write access to the same LUN. At least, that is, not without cluster software. Clustering software is host-based software that allows multiple hosts to access a common shared LUN, or even multiple common shared LUNs. And finally, on the topic of LUN masking can also be done at the host level, though this is rarely done due to its lack of scalability. In this situation, where it's done at the host, each and every host has to have its own set of masking rules, which really becomes hard to manage at scale. It enables this by employing intelligence that ensures all reading and writing to the shared LUN is coordinated so as not to cause corruption. And those are the major principles of LUN mapping and LUN masking required for the CompTIA Storage Plus exam. Let's talk quickly about LUN IDs.